It wasn't just a desert outpost. It was a 15-minute promise that turned into a 15-day nightmare. How did a circle of sand and rusted Roman wells, written off by the legendary Desert Fox himself, manage to shatter the momentum of the world's most feared war machine? Why did the Axis armor, built for the lightning speed of blitzkrieg, stall against a ghost they couldn't even see? And why, when the steel began to melt, did thousands of hardened legionnaires put their lives in the hands of a socialite? But the history books miss the truth. The cameras miss the only person who truly understood the darkness. Susan Travers was ignored, mocked, and dismissed as a distraction in a man's war. Why did the most powerful military system ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog. The sun in the Libyan Desert is a physical weight. It presses down on the sand at Bir Hakeim, a remote, abandoned Ottoman fortress that looks like nothing more than a blemish on the horizon. It is May 1942. General Erwin Rommel, the master of desert warfare, looks at his maps and sees a minor inconvenience. He tells his Italian allies that this little outpost will fall in 15 minutes. He treats the French defenders as a footnote, a lingering nuisance in his march toward the Suez Canal. But the desert has a way of punishing the arrogant. As 60 Italian tanks charge across the flats, their crews are laughing. They see a system of trenches and 75mm guns. To the experts, a 75mm field gun is a relic meant for shelling infantry from a distance. It isn't an anti-tank weapon. But the French aren't playing by the manual. They wait until the tanks are so close they can hear the rattle of the treads. Then they fire. They aim low, using the guns like high-velocity hammers, hitting a glass bottle. In minutes, 31 tanks are burning. The invincible armor becomes a row of steel ovens. While the smoke rises, a woman watches from the shadows of a dugout. She isn't supposed to be there. Her name is Susan Travers, and to the world she left behind, she is an impossibility. Born in the cold, stifling luxury of Kensington, Susan's life began in a different kind of prison. Her father, Admiral Francis Travers, is a man of rigid lines and deep silences. He looks at his daughter and sees a disappointment, a girl who should have been a boy, a social asset who refuses to be an asset. In the Admiral's world, a woman is a decoration. He treats her presence like a clerical error in his perfect naval life. Susan grows up in a gilded cage, surrounded by the French Riviera's elite, gambling at baccarat and competing at Wimbledon. She is tall, athletic, and wicked by her own admission. But she is empty. She is searching for a purpose that doesn't involve a tea set or a marriage contract. When the world catches fire in 1939, the massive system of European society demands she become a nurse. It is the proper way for a woman to serve. But Susan discovers a fundamental truth about herself. She has no stomach for blood. She faints at the sight of a wound. The experts scoff. They tell her she is useless to the war effort. But Susan sees a different path. While the establishment tries to force her into a ward, she finds her way behind the wheel of an ambulance. She realizes she doesn't need to heal the body. She needs to move the machine. She travels to Finland, driving through the sub-zero terror of the Winter War. While the Red Army shells tear up the frozen earth, Susan doesn't flinch. She finds that the roar of an engine is the only thing that drowns out the silence of her father's disapproval. By the time France falls and General de Gaulle calls for resistance, Susan has already shed her Kensington skin. She joins the 13th Demi-Brigade of the French Foreign Legion. The Legion is a system built on outcasts, men with no names and no pasts. They are the most cynical, hardened soldiers on earth. They look at this English socialite and prepare to laugh her out of the camp. But then they see her drive. They see her navigate minefields with the precision of a watchmaker. They see her stay at the wheel while Stuka bombers turn the sky into a screaming wall of lead. The laughter stops. They give her a nickname, La Miss. It isn't a term of endearment, it's an admission of rank. She becomes the ghost in the machine, the quiet competence that moves the elite while they argue over strategy. It is here, in the dust of North Africa, that she meets Colonel Marie-Pierre Koenig. He is the system's rising star. She is his driver. In the eyes of the military, she is a subordinate. In the eyes of the law, she is a mistress to a married man. But in the reality of the desert, they are the only two people who are truly awake. By June 1942, the 15-minute battle at Bir Hakeim has stretched into a 2-week siege. The Desert Fox is losing his patience. He orders his bombers to erase the fortress from the map. 100 Stukas drop 130 tons of explosives in a single afternoon. The heat rises to 124 degrees. The water is gone. The ammunition is a memory. The French generals look at their manuals and see only one outcome: surrender. The system has reached its limit, but as the officers prepare to give up, they look to the front of the line and they see La Miss sitting in a bullet-riddled Ford, her hand steady on the wheel, waiting for the order to move. She isn't waiting for a miracle. She is waiting for the moment the system breaks, so she can drive right through the cracks. The desert has no mercy for those who follow the rules. And by the 10th day of the siege, the rules have completely dissolved. The French garrison at Bir Hakeim is no longer an army. They are ghosts living in holes. The massive system of the Allied command has essentially written them off. To the generals in Cairo, Bir Hakeim is a delaying action, a polite military term for a sacrifice. But Susan Travers does not believe in being a sacrifice. She spends her days in a grave, a hole the size of a coffin dug into the burning sand, listening to the rhythmic thud-thud of 88mm shells. The German artillery is precise, methodical, and arrogant. They believe they are simply tenderizing a corpse. The Axis commanders dismiss the idea of a breakout. They look at the concentric rings of minefields and machine gun nests surrounding the fortress and see a cage. They believe the French will wait until the last drop of water is gone, and then they will walk out with their hands up. They have forgotten about the driver. While the establishment in the officers' mess debates the logistics of surrender, Susan is in the dark, working on the Ford staff car. The vehicle is a wreck. Shrapnel has shredded the roof. The radiator is choked with dust. But Susan treats the machine like a living thing. She understands a truth the generals don't. The machine doesn't care about the rules of engagement. It only cares about physics. One evening, as a fresh barrage of shells begins to walk across the camp, a piece of shrapnel tears through the car's body. Most would have stayed in the trench. But Susan and a Vietnamese driver named Nguyen crawl out of their cover. They don't run. They work. Under a sky lit by magnesium flares, they tear the damaged panels away and patch the cooling system. They are the invisible agents of the machine, fixing what the war is trying to break. The German officers, watching through their binoculars from the cool heights of the dunes, see only a static target. They treat the silence of the fortress as submission, but they have fatally underestimated the underdog. They don't see the woman who has already decided that if she is going to die, she will do it at 100 miles per hour. The crisis hits its peak on the morning of June 9th. The ammunition for the 75mm guns is down to 200 rounds. That is less than 10 minutes of sustained fire. The water ration is reduced to a single cup per man, per day. Men are licking the condensation off the cooling fans of the trucks. The heat is a physical enemy, a hammer that never stops striking. General Koenig calls Susan to his command post. The air inside the dugout is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and burnt tobacco. He looks at her not as a lover and not as a socialite, but as a soldier. "We are going to break out," he says. "We are going to drive through the center of their lines." It is a suicidal plan. To escape, they must navigate a narrow, safe path, cleared by sappers through their own minefield, and then punch through 3 lines of German armor and infantry. If they deviate by even a yard, they hit a mine. If they slow down, the machine guns will turn the trucks into colanders. The system would tell them to wait for a relief column. The manual would say a breakout in darkness. Through a minefield with 2,700 men is a mathematical impossibility. But Koenig doesn't look at the manual. He looks at Susan. "There will be no dishonor if you stay behind, La Miss," he tells her. He is offering her the woman's exit, a chance to be captured and treated as a non-combatant. Susan doesn't even hesitate. "Wherever you go, I go." In that moment, the crystallized arrogance of the era's gender roles shatters. The general doesn't ask his best male driver to lead the column. He doesn't ask an armored car commander. He puts the lives of every surviving Frenchman in the hands of the woman Kensington tried to bury. The night of June 10th is a shroud of ink. At 11 p.m., the order is whispered through the trenches. No lights, no radios. The only sound is the low, guttural growl of engines being turned over. Susan climbs into the driver's seat of the Ford. In the back sit Koenig and Colonel Amilakvari, her current lover, and her former one. It is a scene of absurd tension, but there is no time for drama. There is only the darkness. She begins to move. The column follows her taillights like a funeral procession. The sappers have laid white tape on the ground to mark the path through the mines. Susan has to keep her head out the window, straining her eyes to see a thin strip of fabric in a world of black. She is crawling at 5 miles per hour. Every second feels like a year. The German sensors, the ears of the massive system, are tuned for the sound of an attack. They expect a roar. They don't expect a whisper. For over a mile, Susan leads the ghosts of Bir Hakeim through the teeth of the tiger. But the desert is a cruel judge. Just as they reach the edge of the minefield, a truck in the rear of the column strayed off the path. A mine detonates. The sound is a physical blow that shakes the Ford. A second later, the sky is no longer black. The Germans launch Christmas tree flares, magnesium lights that hang in the air, turning the desert into a strobe-lit stage. The hubris of the German command evaporates in an instant. They realize their prey is fleeing. The hammer falls. Tracer fire begins to crisscross the sand, long glowing fingers of red and green searching for flesh. Machine guns open up from 3 sides. The silence is replaced by the steel scream, the sound of thousands of rounds of ammunition being spent in a panic. "Drive!" Koenig shouts. Susan doesn't just drive. She hammers the accelerator. The Ford leaps forward, the engine screaming as it hits the red line. She isn't following the white tape anymore. She is aiming for the gaps between the tracer fire. She is driving by instinct, navigating a maze of fire and flying sand. Behind her, the column is dissolving. Trucks are exploding as they hit mines. Men are jumping from burning vehicles, running into the dark. But Susan keeps her foot pinned to the floor. The Ford bounces over rocks, the suspension groaning as the shock absorbers are pulverized. She hears the thud, thud, thud of bullets hitting the bodywork. A round punches through the windshield, showering her with glass. She doesn't flinch. Another round rips through the seat next to her. She doesn't slow down. The German tanks, realizing the breakout is happening, begin to fire their main guns. 88mm shells scream past the Ford, the vacuum of their passage sucking the air out of Susan's lungs. To the German gunners, she is just a shape in the dark. To the Frenchmen behind her, she is the only thing between them and a POW camp. She is no longer the socialite. She is no longer the admiral's disappointment. She is the point of the spear. As the Ford slams through a German machine gun nest, Susan feels the steering wheel kick in her hands. The tires are shredded. The brakes have failed. The car is literally being held together by momentum and her own will. She is driving a wreck through a furnace, leading 2,700 men toward a horizon they can't even see. The system told her she didn't belong here. The experts told her she couldn't handle the sight of blood. But as she steers into the heart of the fire, Susan Travers is the only one who isn't afraid of the dark. The desert is never truly silent, but at 10:30 on the morning of June 11th, the silence feels like a physical blow. Susan Travers finally lets her foot lift from the accelerator. The Ford staff car rolls to a halt near the British lines at El Adam, its engine clicking and ticking as it begins to cool. She sits there for a moment, her hands still locked in a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. She doesn't move. She doesn't celebrate. She simply breathes in the smell of scorched oil and cordite. When she finally steps out of the car, she looks back at the machine that saved her. The Ford is a skeleton of what it once was. There are 11 distinct bullet holes in the bodywork. The shock absorbers are shattered. The brakes are non-existent. The roof is a memory. It is a mechanical miracle that the car is still in one piece. A system failure that somehow kept running on nothing but Susan's refusal to stop. Behind her, the horizon is filled with the survivors. Out of the 3,700 men who held Bir Hakeim, 2,700 have emerged from the fire. They are exhausted, covered in a thick crust of sand and dried blood. But they are alive. They have done what the experts said was impossible. They have turned Rommel's 15-minute victory into a 15-day embarrassment. The massive system of the Axis army had every advantage: armor, air superiority, and the weight of history. But they were defeated by a deadly gap in their own logic. They believed that because they held the perimeter, they held the soul of the defenders. They didn't realize that the human spirit doesn't follow a map. The immediate aftermath is a whirlwind of praise. Winston Churchill calls them the fighting French. The world hails the heroic defense of Bir Hakeim. General Koenig is promoted to a national icon, but for Susan, the victory has a bitter aftertaste. As the war moves on, the establishment begins to reassert itself. Koenig is now a general of high standing. His career is a machine that cannot afford the friction of a mistress, especially not a British socialite who drove him through a minefield. The man she calls the love of her life returns to his wife and his protocols. The system that needed her when the shells were falling now finds her inconvenient. But Susan Travers isn't done with the machine. In May 1945, as the lights go back on across Europe, Susan does something that shocks the military hierarchy once again. She applies to officially join the French Foreign Legion. On the application, she conveniently leaves the gender section blank. The clerks, overwhelmed by the chaos of the war's end, process the paperwork. She becomes Legionnaire number 22166. She is the first and only woman to ever serve officially in the Legion. She isn't there as a decoration or a nurse. She is a soldier. She serves in Vietnam during the First Indochina War, earning 12 military decorations from 4 different nations. She earns the Légion d'honneur, France's highest order of merit. Yet, for decades, the history books remain silent about her. In the official accounts of Bir Hakeim, the driver of the lead vehicle is often omitted or referred to in the masculine. The system simply couldn't process the fact that its greatest escape was led by a woman from Kensington who wanted to be wicked. Susan doesn't fight the silence. She waits. She lives quietly on the outskirts of Paris, raising 2 sons, watching the world change. She waits until every general, every lover, and every critic is in the ground. In the year 2000, at the age of 90, she finally tells her story. When her memoir, Tomorrow to be Brave, is published, the world is forced to look at the underdog they tried to forget. Only then, in the twilight of her life, does the recognition arrive. In 2024, the city of Paris officially designated the Belvédère Suzanne Travers on the Île aux Cygnes, a memorial sitting directly adjacent to the bridge named for Bir Hakeim. It is a timeless echo of a girl who refused to stay in her gilded cage. We see this same hubris in our society today, the belief that the Aka experts in the room always know who the heroes will be. We still try to fit people into boxes, ignoring the quiet competence of those who don't look the part. Susan Travers didn't save 2,700 men because she was a socialite or a driver. She saved them because when the system failed, she was the only one who knew how to find the path in the dark. General Koenig saw her one last time in 1956. He pinned a medal to her chest and said only 3 words. "Well done, La Miss." It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. But then again, Susan Travers never did it for the system. She did it for the engine, the road, and the freedom of the desert night. If you believe that stories like Susan Travers deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing and liking this video. Every forgotten truth we unearth is a victory against the silence of history. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.